Aristotelian logic was Aristotle looking at the way humans reason and deriving from that a system. Whereas modern logic asks the question of not how do humans think, but what is any way in which something could be derived?
Welcome to Classical Etc. You are in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud, and I am here with our core four, Martin, Tanya, and Paul. It's been at least an episode since we've been all back together, I think.
I can't even remember.
I don't know.
My life has gotten so crazy. It's just one thing after another.
I don't either. I've been on the show before.
Welcome, Martin. Glad to have you. Well, today we're going to get an update on what everybody's reading, because I think it's been a minute, and then cover a listener question. And then we're going to dive into a foundational but maybe intimidating topic, and that is teaching logic. Glad we have an expert here, Mr. Martin Cothran, who wrote our...
Nice to be here.
Yes.
Self-acclaimed expert.
We'll take it. So what's everybody been reading? Have you had time, Paul? Now that the farm's back up and running?
I mentioned in a recent episode that I needed something that was interesting enough to keep me interested, but not too interested to keep me awake and not like really thoughtful. It just wasn't something that I want to sit down with a pen, right? Mm-hmm. And I actually went and pulled out a book that I think Martin gave me for like Christmas book exchange like 3 years ago, maybe. That was a used book.
Of course.
The Flaming Forest.
From my trunk.
By James Oliver Curwood, is that right?
James Oliver Curwood.
And it's set in northern Canada, and it's just a fun adventure book. It has got me reading the evenings again because like it would get to be like 9:30 and I'm like, I'm going to bed in a half hour. I don't have the mental acuity to like sit and read this Icelandic epic that I've been trying to, get through or something. And so I've got going on that. And then I figured I had to pick up The Name of the Rose because I've been advocating for this book and the book club's going to go through that soon. And I picked that up, and it's just so wonderful.
It is so good.
Oh, it's so good.
Big, though.
You've
got a ways to go.
I've read it before, and I do have it on Audible, so I could listen to it some. But, like, sitting down and reading it, I've realized, I think at one point, maybe Mitchell told me this, that, like, when Umberto Eco, somebody asked him why he wrote it, and he was like, I just wanted to write a book for me there's, like, a lot of stuff in there that I know is going on, but probably nobody actually understands everything that's going on. And there's comments in there that you can tell he's taking digs at philosophers left and right. And it's really kind of fun when you can see some of the stuff he's doing in there. I got
it on Audible because I also have read it because you told me to read it years ago. And so I thought this time I'll listen to it on my commute while I also I've got the actual book as well. And so I started yesterday listening to, it's a great narrator. Mm-hmm. I don't remember his name, but he's really good. I mean, he sets the mood very well. Mm-hmm. And then I went home and I just looked back through because the opening that Echo writes was confusing to me. And then I got into the story. So I started reading it again and I thought, I had just listened to it like an hour before, and I found myself reading every word again because it was so good. It's so well written.
The translator did a phenomenal job.
Yes, it's so good, and so I'm really excited about it. But
people should probably know Echo is one of the great polymaths, who knows everything about everything. Mm-hmm. And there's actually, if you go online somewhere on YouTube, there's a little video of him. And somebody's asked him to find a book in his library. He has this huge library. I mean, there's a library in The Name of the Rose, right? That
figures.
Yeah. And but he's got this great library himself, and it just shows him going down all these little labyrinths and all that for about 60 seconds, and finally he gets to a shelf and he pulls it off.
And he knew exactly what I've seen it, so he knows exactly what the book is. It's
that's fun.
Yeah, but it is a hard book. It's I would call it
it's long
advanced
too. It is
literature.
Advanced. It
so
is advanced.
You don't want to try that one without some preparation.
Well, or I would recommend my method of actually listening to it.
Yeah,
then with the book. Having the book, because the narrator really does bring it alive immediately.
Yeah, and I think the very beginning of it, you can get bogged down in it, sort of like you could get bogged down in the Customs House and the Scarlet Letter, right? Like, you're like, what in the world does it have to do with anything? And afterwards you realize like why that's so important. But just if you don't get bogged down in the couple of prefaces that are there,
That's right.
Get into the story and you'll be taken away.
I mean, when they get to the Abbey and and the seller is looking for the horse, and he gives all these, like, this is where he went, and then explains to the main character how he knew. It's like Sherlock Holmes. It's very, very Holmes.
Deductive reasoning.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's some things in there that are philosophically pretty advanced. There's some implications about the medieval debate over ontology in there.
Yeah, but you don't have to understand that to get into the story.
You don't have to know that to enjoy the story.
The story is really the dominant thing, because I wouldn't know any of that stuff, but it didn't stop me from enjoying the book at all. But I am really enjoying it the second time now that I've restarted it. But I'm also reading the second Mick Herron spy novel for the Slow Horses series.
Oh, the second what?
So good. Mick Herron. I told you wrote it down last time.
I did, yeah. And
so
I lost
it's like Le Carre, like George Smiley. They're so good that you would like them.
And it's really not a cozy. It's not a British literature.
No, it's literally a spy novel. It is a spy novel. Okay. Yes. And I just love the first one. So it's funny, but it's one of those where it's what you want to read before you go to bed. It's what I want to read with my coffee in the morning because it's just fun.
And it's McHarry?
McHerron.
McHerron.
Herron. Okay. Mick. It's British.
No surprise.
I was going to say. All good spy novels are probably.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, probably so. I mean, the best ones would be British, right. The Cold War. Yeah, but this is this is current times. But it's all these people that were involved in the Cold War. And now it's current times and that's over, but it's fun. Just fun.
Martin?
I am reading Lou Marcos's new book called Passing the Torch, an apology for classical Christian education. And it's very good.
I didn't even know he had that out.
Yes, it's just out. So this will be in our short list for the Parnassus Prize for Memoria College. We've already given him an award, though he won it for another book, so we can't give him another one. But we're going to tip the hat here, I think. And I think he's got. From Achilles to Christ, which we carry, from Plato to Christ. He's coming out with another one from Aristotle to Christ, and they're all just so good. He's a really good writer. He writes for a general audience, so you don't need to have any specialized knowledge to understand him. And he just knows so much about so many things. So I'm reading that, and then I'm teaching rhetoric again. I haven't mentioned this, I guess, and
for the college.
No, for our here at the,
Are you, Martin?
He's teaching the seniors.
Yeah, teaching the seniors. And it just strikes me again, because I'm thinking, this is not directly going to help my students right now in how to write a paper. But it's got all kinds of indirect. I mean, it's about Aristotle. It's all about the soul, and the whole book is based on the structure of the soul.
Because you're trying to persuade another person, you have to understand who that other person is.
Yeah, right. And so he just delves very deeply into all that stuff. And it's in a way persuasive writing instruction. I mean, he's dealing with some very basic things. And it's kind of a hard book because it's an ancient book and he's writing for ancient people.
But we're doing it with seniors. You think it's a good capstone?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think I would probably shorten it some for that purpose if I had to do it over again. But because there's stuff in there that he gets pretty technical.
I just I've been in the middle of your rhetoric course as well, because I just took our year-long plans and turned them into semester-long for those who'd want to spend a semester on. So you could say I've been in the middle of Aristotle.
Have you cut anything?
What I cut is figures of speech and how to read a book. Because to do it in a semester, they just really need Aristotle.
Yes, right.
Speaking of you teaching today, one of my students asked when I walked in the room, if an actor were to play me, who do I think it should be? And I was like, I don't know. And he then said that he's trying to identify actors for every teacher, and for you, it was going to be Martin Short.
Oh.
Okay, this is how out of it I am. I don't even know who Martin Short is. I think I do, but I just don't.
He's the Steve Martin's sidekick.
Yeah, he's really funny. He was in Father of the Bride, all kinds of movies.
Oh yeah, and he does modern day. Martin Short's
really? Okay.
And so I said, if that's the case, then I need to be Steve Martin, because
that's right, because you all are like the duo.
Yes.
That's right. Oh, that's funny.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
I would consider it a compliment.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. That's funny. Well, let's move on to answer a listener question. This is actually picking up where we left off last time. We had a listener named Bridget write us 2 different questions. So, Bridget, as promised, we are following up to answer your second question of your email. And Bridget's asking about our discussion of John Senior's list of good books. And she asks, I've wondered about the literature picks for the Memoria curriculum in early years. It seems there are modern works included and not many of John Senior's recommendations for the good books in those primary grades. Could you point me to another episode or possibly dive deeper into some reasons behind that? So she's saying we reference the John Senior list of books, but in our primary grade read aloud recommendations, not all of his books are in there. She's wondering why.
Oh, and she doesn't necessarily mention the read alouds, right? So
that's true.
Well, she says she could have missed them in the enrichment pack. Oh. She could have missed them in the read alouds, but that is true. But as you were reading the list of books for grade, like ages 2 to 7, one of them that was on that list is Wind in the Willows, which we wouldn't consider a good choice for primary. I mean, we do that book in 7th or 8th grade because it feels like a children's book because it's talking animals, but it's really not. It's so much deeper than that. So some of our choices, like Tales from Shakespeare, I think was one. We've got that up as a read aloud in older grades. So some of those things that he's chosen, we have moved up to where we feel like they would be more age appropriate.
But also because there's, we have a distinction between we're just reading it, which is the way he's treating the 1,000 great books or good books, is you're just going to read it and you're going to move on. Whereas some of these we're actually treating as books we're going to dig deeply into, which means it needs to be applied to an older audience.
Well, it's a fairly long list too, much longer than you could do. Too long a list to study everything on there. That's just a general list. Just blow through these, be generally familiar with them. You don't have to. There are other ways to let literature have an influence on you than just to take a long time on one book and read it deeply. Some writers write a lot of stuff and you just blow through them and you can get sort of the same effect from them.
And I feel like at least, so she's talking about the primary grades. First grade, we've chosen classic children's books that are read aloud, but we've also had to be really careful of the Lexile level because our students are reading those books themselves. They're not read alouds for us. But in the enrichment, that's where we can go a little higher level. And I think she would find more of the books in those enrichment read aloud sets. And also some of the books in his list are not for our age, not really
like our contemporary time.
Yes, like Uncle Remus, that would be not really culturally popular these days.
It's too bad. I mean, I hear that observation a lot. Those are priceless stories. Those are Black folk tales. They have a cultural value. They're wonderful.
It's
they're creative.
Just the language is hard to read aloud.
Yeah, well, if you don't know that, yes, the original certainly. But like Julius Lester has editions of those out where he has, brought those kind of up to date. And he's a Black author.
I haven't seen those.
Yeah, there's a whole set of those, and they're pretty good. And sometimes he contemporizes them too much, I think. But I just love the old stories. They're treasures. And
I think they would be fine in a homeschool in your home.
I think right. Yeah,
I think it would be harder in a classroom.
Yeah. And another thing I noticed looking at his list was like, it's almost like he would take an author like Louisa May Alcott and say, okay, everything she's written, I'm going to put on that list, right? Whereas we tend to do maybe one book from an author so that we've exposed the student to that author, and then they can go read a whole bunch more out
if
of them.
interested.
Yeah, and I think he's sort of assuming that people will look at it and I mean, if I were doing that list myself, I would bold certain books, the ones you read this one deeply.
Don't miss this one.
Don't miss this one.
Right.
And then just be I think that his list really is meant. These are the ones you need to be familiar with. It's just as a matter of cultural literacy, and to get all the little assumptions and the implicit beliefs and everything of our civilization. It just comes through in those, not by intention, but it just rubs off on you, and you begin to know all that stuff.
It's a good way to put it. Well, moving on to today's topic, how to teach logic effectively. And Martin, I want to start with you.
Why would you start with me?
Our logic author and teacher. Why is logic essential in a classical education?
Partly to help answer questions like that. No,
Fair.
I mean, you have to proceed from a premise to you have to be able to proceed from a premise to a conclusion. I mean, in order to really figure out anything. But some people. What I think actually is that I know people who've never taken a logic course, they've never taken a philosophy course, and they can argue really well. They just have somehow mastered the rational mode of thinking and expression. And there are others who have not, and they just don't think that way. And in terms of practical application, a program like this is not going to help that person who already is really rational and can argue, probably because he's done a lot of it, all that much, although he'll see things he didn't see before, and it may be useful for some specialized applications. But the people it's going to help are those who have not bothered to think that way much and have just not had the occasion to argue a point with another person or contend for a position and that sort of thing. So you need to get some practice at it. And, my book was written to give you a lot of practice, a lot of exercises in there. And like most of the stuff I think that Memoria Press does, and certainly what my books try to do, is to almost a little bit of overkill, to just practice, so that if you do all the exercises in the program, you will get it. There's no way out of it because you've done so much.
Well, and
it's all mastery learning.
Yeah, but the reality is, logic is a mental. There's content to be learned, but in the end, we want you to learn that skill of being able to think deductively, and so the more you practice it, the more you're going to pick up that skill. Right?
And are there different types of logic?
Well, there's different categories, if you will, where you've got. If you think about logic broadly speaking, which is making arguments, but then you've got the form of the argument, which is people call formal logic. We call it traditional logic. You just hear it sort of in the context of syllogisms, right? You got to learn how to do a syllogism or valid form of syllogisms, and then you've got the content area of your logical argument, which is the matter of it, like the stuff that makes up your argument. And so that's why Martin's book's titled Material Logic. It's a older term for it, but those are really like, because if you talk about causes, right? You got your formal cause, material cause. Those are two things. You've got your logic. Now you also will hear informal logic or fallacies used sort of informal. Sometimes they mean material. Sometimes they mean fallacies. That fallacies is sort of a way of teaching some logical conclusions, but it's not. It's not one of those two. It's not one of the two things of material or formal that make up logic. So fallacies can be arrived at through knowing the form and knowing the matter. But it's just sort of like, when I was a kid, we would have mental math competitions. And so in math class, they would teach us like mental math tricks, like how to multiply by 11, where you're not actually carrying the one and all that sort of stuff. And fallacies is sort of like that for logic. They're mental tricks that are going to get you there faster without having to know everything behind it.
Got it.
But it's not, it's not, fundamentally they're derived from the form and the material.
But people want to start with fallacies. I get
Because
questions
it's
all the
easier.
time.
I do too, because there are some programs out there that
like detective fallacies and
Right.
things. People love
That's
those
right.
kinds of things. You're not a fan.
Well, no, I mean, informal logic's fine, but it's not structured really in any way. There's psychological informal fallacies. There's linguistic informal fallacies, but they're you can't ever say why they're wrong. Which is why I always recommend, do traditional logic first, because it's cut and dried. I mean, it's either valid or it's not valid, and there are reasons why it isn't. There's certain rules you got to follow. Whereas, and so you're going to actually learn a process of thought. In informal reasoning, all you're doing is identifying something that's wrong. That's an example of this fallacy, or that's an example of that fallacy. But you never learn why they're wrong.
It's not giving you the tools.
It's not giving you the tools.
Got it.
Right. And it's not that they're bad. It's just that they're secondary, I think, in terms of education.
And everybody wants to do those first because they are, I guess, fun.
Yeah.
And they're made for younger students. So if you're like anxious to get started with logic, then they don't hurt anything, right?
No, they don't hurt anything. It's
just
so long as you don't assume this is
it. I've done logic.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, so you can say, somebody says to you something, and say, well, that's the ad populum fallacy. That doesn't help you in an argument.
That's right.
The person says, well, I don't even know what that is.
Right.
So whereas in logic, you can say, well, okay, you realize what you're assuming here, don't you? Because you've been able to do that in your head as the person's talking. Well, you're assuming X. Is that what you really believe? Oh, well, no, so you can figure out why your opponent is wrong, and you can point it out to them, where you can't do that in an informal fallacy.
And when it comes to teaching logic, what do you have to say to someone who might be tasked with this in their school, or might really want to do it for their child at home, but they don't have a background? So some of the things you're even saying might be really interesting to them, but they have no background. Can they do this? And
yeah, I mean, I wrote these things, again, like a lot of Memoria's material, to be self-instructive. Everything is presented. It's presented step by step. It builds on previous chapters. So if you continue through the program, I have talked to so many students and parents who've gone through the entire 2 traditional logic books. I mean, a lot of them.
I love your layout. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4.
Well,
and I love that you say at the beginning to read the whole chapter. Just read it, just to read through. And then day 1, go back and read this little section and then answer these questions.
I tell you exactly what to do at every step.
Yes. For somebody like me, that's huge. I love that. I know exactly what the day is going to look like.
Yeah, and I think that's why so many people are able to get through it, because it really does. Because a lot of books you do chapter 1, you do chapter 2, you go to chapter 3, and that 3 doesn't really have that much to do with chapter 2, or you haven't mastered everything really to understand that chapter. That does not happen in these books. You know at every level what you should know to go on to the next step.
Look. Mick Heron, there's where you wrote it last time.
Oh.
There he is. Put a star so you'll read.
See, I didn't lose it after all.
Yeah, there it is. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's not that you were boring.
Jessica.
It's not that you were boring me or anything.
No.
But
Just
my
reading
mind
his
might
notes.
have wandered. Wow.
And I should also point out that my logic programs, if you go to college and you take a course on formal logic, say probably in the philosophy department, a philosophy course, you're probably not going to study what's in my book.
Why is that?
Well, you think even in the philosophy
yes, absolutely.
department?
Well, you do a little of this just in passing as you're on to modern, mine's called traditional logic. Modern logic is a different system. It's very mathematical. It's all symbolic. And it's all formal. There is no informal aspect to modern logic.
Or material. There's no
material aspect. Material logic, which is my other book. But we can explain that in a minute. But it's if P then Q, P therefore Q. It's that kind of stuff. Not all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, which would be a traditional logic way of doing it. So it gets away from real language, and it's the kind of stuff. Like I said, it's sort of mathematical, and so there are computer programming applications for modern logic, because modern logic really is kind of the basis of computer programming. And but traditional logic is what you actually use in real life. You don't use symbols, right? But in modern logic, you're doing proofs, and it's all all these theta plus. That's not what you do in real life,
right? Well, and if you think about it, right, like Aristotelian logic was Aristotle looking at the way humans reason and deriving from that a system. Whereas modern logic asks the question of not how do humans think, but sort of what is any way in which something could be derived. And because like Martin said, there's no material object to it, right? That's why computers can spit out really crazy things, is because they're not asking the question of, in this form, like, because it's possible that there could be a valid form, that there's just nothing in the world that you could actually come up with a legitimate example that would be true. So we have valid form, but you could never come up with anything true to stick in that form. Whereas in computers, you just go ahead, stick it in.
The way I say that is the truth or falsity of the elements has no bearing on the modern logic statement, because it's dealing with the relationships between whole statements, not between concepts. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. There's three concepts you're dealing with there. It's the relationship between these really kind of philosophical concepts. A word represents a concept, and so you're getting really into how you actually think in rational terms by dealing with words and the concepts that they represent, whereas modern logic doesn't deal with that at all.
So it's more like algebra?
Modern logic is, yes. It's very, it's algebraic in its expression anyway.
Yeah. And if somebody were to say, well, and I've never heard anybody make this argument, but like modern logic practices a skill that traditional logic doesn't, then if somebody were to make that argument, the response would be, well, you practice that skill in algebra.
You're already doing math.
That's right.
And in fact, that's I remember from my high school math class, senior math class, was they had a whole section on modern logic. If P then Q, P therefore Q, all this stuff. That's in, they actually do that in math. But you don't, there's no other place that you do traditional logic.
Well, and traditional logic is traditionally in the trivia, right? Which is all the arts of language. And so like trying to supplant traditional logic with modern logic is a miscategorization of that. Yes. That ought to be over in the quadrivium, not in the trivium.
Right. And it's not that modern logic is bad or anything. It's just that its use is very limited. It doesn't matter whether P is true or false. It doesn't matter if Q is true or false. It doesn't affect the truth of a modern logic statement. Whereas it matters what word you're using in traditional logic, because it's referring to a concept.
So is material logic informal?
No, material logic.
Hold on. When you say informal, sometimes the term informal is used as the opposite of formal, which would be
that would be how I would do it. I was just going to say,
which in this case would then fit it would be material logic. So some people call what they call informal logic is what we would call material logic. Not because it's the name of our book, but because it's the section of logic that deals with the matter, the content of the argument. And so traditionally, logic was broken down with the terms formal and material, not formal and informal. But some people use the term informal to mean material logic.
Yeah, really, the material logic is very interesting to me because it's dealing with these it's really, I think of it as like introductory metaphysics, because it's dealing with the 10 categories of thought and the 5 ways you can say something about something else, and definition and the 4 causes and division. How do you outline? I've never seen a program that teaches you how to outline. I think my material logic program is the only program that does this because it tells you how do you logically divide something. It teaches you how to do that, the skill behind outlining.
Then that needs to be earlier in the curriculum if it's going to teach outlining.
Well, I mean, you don't have to outline for that program, but early in our program, you mean, yeah.
Yeah, the rest of the program you can't do earlier.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Martin, because we've been talking about some big things, big words, big abstract thoughts. When is the right time? When is the right age to start this?
Well, I think, what Tanya's saying is kind of interesting because in a way, if you put the easiest things in that book first, you probably put the last chapter first and the second to the last chapter second. And because the first one we tackle is the categories, the 10 ways you can say something about something else. And
that's
these are different kinds of concepts.
Right. So when do you start traditional logic 1?
Oh, traditional logic 1. Okay. Yeah. Traditional logic 1.
Where do you start? That's the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, you could start it, and some people use it this early in the 7th grade. But you take a year with it.
Yeah.
I think if you the first
book, they have to stew in
each book. There's 2 books in traditional. Do each in a year if you're going to start that early. But I mean, I've taught it that early. It's fine.
It's fine if you've got a teacher leading you through it.
Oh yes,
somebody like you that can lead them through it because you understand it.
Yes.
But I would hesitate at home to do it. I think Nick was in the 7th grade when he had logic with you, and it was fine because he had you. But I don't think I could have taught it to him. I feel like logic to me feels, is that your phone?
It's lunchtime.
So popular.
This is reminding you to go to the cafeteria.
Yeah, so I'll see you later.
I feel like that the students need to be really developmentally ready for that kind of abstract thinking. And so it feels more to me like the older the student is, the faster you can move because they're able to get it. It's just like when you're trying to when we were teaching Latin and we were teaching the same Latin course back in way early when she was just writing it. And you were teaching the older students and I was teaching the younger. And your students were getting it and it has nothing to do with the fact that you were a better Latin teacher than me. Okay. Literally, because I taught those same young students the next year, and it was just like you could just see that their brains were ready to comprehend what I was trying to give to them, whereas before I was just like dragging it out of them and basically handing them everything.
Can I throw a wrench in this though? If like the goal is that it forms their pattern of thought, even though it takes longer earlier, it would probably have more of an impact, a longer term impact on the way they think.
Earlier. I think too, it just depends on the student because I've talked to a lot of students at homeschool conventions looking for logic 2, and they were young and they loved logic 1. They did it by themselves.
Wow.
And really, some people's brains just work like that.
Well, the other thing too, if you, like I said, take a year with each of the 2 traditional logic books and start in 7th grade. I think, the first book is about half the difficulty level
of the
second book. So you are giving them something easier. You're doing the easy part of the course. And presumably after you've done that and got another year on you,
right?
Then
you've set the foundation because you've moved at a slower pace.
Yeah.
So you've really mastered rather than just moving through and getting straight to logic 2. I can see that you could start younger, but that year would make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then you're spending 2 weeks on each lesson.
Yes.
So you're really going to hopefully nail it.
I think so.
Even if they are developmentally young.
Yep, I think so.
I think that's right.
Perfect. Paul's affirmations.
Material logic to me, when my kids were taking logic with you, I felt like looked a lot easier to me.
Really?
Yes, I felt like I
no.
understood it much better than traditional.
It's more conceptual and less structural. I mean, traditional logic.
I found it easier to read.
Well, yeah,
it was than all that traditional diagrams and.
That's also the way your brain works.
It is the way my brain works.
But the distinctions in the categories, what's action, what's passion, what's posture, what's, all of that stuff, like habit, some of those things, like you look at them and you go, oh, that makes sense. But then when you actually say, like, in this context, what category is being used, that's where things get really hairy really quickly.
And I didn't actually do the exercises.
Yeah.
And the thing, when I teach that program, Material Logic, I always think we are delving so deeply into language and the philosophical aspect of language. I mean, you finish that study on the categories and you know every type of word. You know how it differs from these other types of words in terms of what it's referring to. And so I think it's really invaluable to look at language in that way, because they have to, I'll give them a whole paragraph from some piece of literature, and they're supposed to identify, which is substance, which is time, which is place, which is passion, posture, possession. There's 10 kinds of words, and they got to look at every one of those and figure it out. That's pretty sophisticated, and it just to be able to ask those questions of the language we use every day, I think is so instructive.
Well, and also because it's Aristotelian, the children are being trained in an understanding that language is supposed to reflect reality, right? There's supposed to be a clear tether to the concept that's in my mind and what it refers to in reality. And I think that's an important thing for students to...
And the fact that language is so mysterious in so many ways, this thing that we use all the time, and the thing we use to think, really. And so to see that there really are only 10 kinds of words, that's it, no more, no less, that this language we use is philosophically structured, that there's this order behind it. To me, that's mind-blowing. I don't know if my students ever totally get that, but yeah.
It's almost like it's divine.
It's almost like it is, yeah.
And for the philosophy course, I say you have to have done material logic first. Like at the end of the philosophy course, you will end up, or halfway through, you end up with a defense of the four causes, whereas in Martin's material logic, it just says, here's what the four causes are. And so they kind of vaguely have that idea of here's these four causes, but they don't, there's no defense for them. But
if you don't know what they are going into Introduction to Philosophy, then you've got to do that before you can.
Well, as you're like discovering the causes, if you will, you have nowhere to put that information, if you will. Like, right? Like if you've already been introduced to the four causes, you already have buckets in your mind of like, this is where it's going. And then when all of a sudden, when you see the defense, you go, oh, that connects over here. Right. And it makes actually mastering what's introduced in that philosophy course more possible because you've been introduced to it a little bit before.
So I can't remember. Do I have material logic in the correct place?
Yes,
right
you do.
Before Intro to Philosophy. Well, good.
For me, the last I checked, you did.
And where's informal fallacies?
We don't teach it, but you teach it in the online academy, and it's after traditional and material, right?
Yes.
It's at the end.
That's right.
I think I've entertained the idea of doing a book on that. I if I have enough time left,
That's ominous.
I would like to do another book on informal fallacy. It would be because fallacies technically are a part of material logic. I only did it like half of material logic. There's actually a couple other branches of it, and one of them is fallacies. And so it's either another book on fallacies or another book on scientific reasoning, which I actually would really like to write. I've had some
maybe you can get them both done. People are living longer.
Yeah. Maybe not me, though. I mean,
Well, you never know.
Yeah.
You just never know.
Yeah. So that's
Okay.
kind of what I'm thinking about.
Well, we better go so he can get on it.
That's right.
Oh, but he's got to get lunch first.
No, I got my lunch.
His lunch alarm. Well, your alarm went on.
I know, but I forgot to turn it off because I had to do it early because the show was on. And then I have to go teach after this.
Oh, that's right.
You're in demand.
And you're
Martin.
teaching rhetoric.
I'm teaching rhetoric, which we
Yeah.
didn't talk about.
We didn't. We missed it. Next time. Well, Martin, thanks for letting us pick your brain, and Paul and Tanya too, about logic. I hope that folks feel like our materials and just generally they feel more empowered to be able to do it, because you can with our lesson plans and with everything that we offer, even if you don't have a background.
Cheryl and I, we were very intentional about this, about making things teachable.
Yes.
Right.
And I think that's the greatest aspect of our company is that we make this hard stuff teachable.
That's right. Yeah. And we have it on our website, memoriapress.com. We have a whole tab for logic. So you can find any of this and probably even some of Martin's logic articles.
Oh,
If
they're
you
so
search-
hard to read.
But worthwhile. So-
Martin, I cannot say that I feel the same way.
there you go.
Your logic articles don't seem hard to read to me.
Only for some people, some who are
Because you're
maybe
classically
challenged a little bit.
educated.
Yes, well,
I'm challenged.
Well, on that note,
We could have a whole show on that. How Tanya is challenged.
we'll save it for next time. Thanks, everybody. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.